Hello, I'm Ken Arscott, your narrator. Of all the training you will receive as a security officer, law of arrest is probably one of the most important subjects. Powers of arrest vary from state to state, and in some states, security officers have no arrest powers. Most states have different levels of arrest powers for security officers. For example, in some states, one level of security officers cannot make arrests, but the next level up has the authority to make arrests. Your instructor will advise you what the limitations for your state demands. This training session is an overview of various criminal acts and how you should respond regarding arrest powers. Your response can be as simple as observing and then reporting, or as important as making an arrest. The primary duty of a security officer is to act as a deterrent. In other words, while you're working, your primary responsibility is to prevent crimes, violations of regulations, and policies from happening. This could be anything from a criminal act to just stopping people from entering a building without proper identification. Crime in progress. All that's fine, but what if you're on duty and observe an actual crime being committed or about to occur? What can you do about it? What authority do you have? Can you arrest them? These are all justified questions. You need to know the answers to these questions so that you can determine if you can make an arrest or not. In this training video, we will cover the security officer power of arrest levels and sublevels. What I mean by this is, Level 1, security officers may not make arrests. In Level 2, security officers can only make arrests for felonies committed in their presence. Level 3, security officers may arrest for either felonies or misdemeanors committed in their presence. Right now, this may be a little confusing to someone not familiar with the law, but as we progress, it will become a lot more clear. At the end of this training session, you should be able to understand what a criminal act is, when an arrest can be made, and by what authority. Your classroom instructor should advise you what your arrest authorities and limitations are in your state. Arresting someone is a sensitive action that could have negative repercussions, such as your personal safety is probably the most important negative repercussion. What if the suspect is armed? What if the suspect is high on PCP? What if the suspect is a woman? What if the person is much bigger than you? These are all considerations you need to evaluate before taking any action. The next is liability. Suppose you arrest someone without probable cause. What if after you arrest someone, they try to get away, and when you try to restrain them, they get injured? Did you have probable cause? What is probable cause? I'll get into this a lot more later, but basically it means that you were justified in making the arrest. If you arrest someone without justification, that will be defined as a false arrest. There are more and more, and I will cover them later in this session. Making an arrest is one of the areas that sometimes gets security officers into trouble. If they make a wrong judgment call, not only will they get into trouble, but they get their company in trouble as well. This kind of trouble usually winds up in civil court, or worse, criminal court, with a security officer charged with a crime. Most of the time, the wrong call is due to the lack of training and/or the security officer did not understand their state laws and regulations. The laws in many states pertaining to security officers are established precedents and are used as guidelines to prevent injuries and damages that can result in a lawsuit or other legal actions. For the most part, these laws are sources of authority rather than absolute definitions of authority. Basically, what that means is that the state has laws and regulations that, if followed correctly, the chances of civil or criminal charges against the security officer are improbable. This doesn't mean that a suspect can't sue anyway, and trust me, they do. But the criminal charges should never get beyond a hearing with the district attorney. Criminal and civil law. Before we continue, you need to understand the difference between criminal and civil law. Criminal laws are laws that give the courts the authority to punish someone who commits a crime. These punishments can be just a fine or a jail sentence, and in some cases, both. Civil cases are sometimes referred to as torts. A tort is a civil wrong or a wrongful act, whether intentional or accidental, from which injury occurs to another. If you observe a criminal act and ignore it or do not respond appropriately, this could become a lawsuit. It could cause financial loss to you, your company, and your company's client. Lawsuits are more problematic in the contract guard industry. Just ask your management what it costs them for liability insurance every year. To make matters worse, insurance premiums have increased dramatically for the security industry and are continuing to rise. Why? Well, it's a combination of lack of training, guilty verdicts by sympathetic juries, and out-of-court settlements. You see, when there's a lawsuit, the attorneys look for the solution that will cost their clients the least. So rather than go to trial, they settle. Many times this is done even though the company feels that they were right. It's all about money. As I mentioned earlier, each state has its own laws and codes regarding security officer arrest powers. It would be impossible to discuss them all in this short training tape. Your instructor will explain your state's arrest powers at the end of this video. A crime is defined as an act which is forbidden by law and carries a sanction for its violation. In more layman terms, the definition of a crime is a set of facts or circumstances that are forbidden by law, punishable in a court with a fine and/or a jail sentence. Crimes like first-degree murder can impose the death penalty. When does a crime actually occur? An occurrence or incident is not a crime unless there's a law against it. If there is no law against what a person is doing, they're not committing a crime. In some cases, they may not be breaking the law, but they're breaking company policies and regulations. This is not a crime, but the person could lose their job, which is a form of punishment. Another would be violating a city ordinance, such as illegal parking, for which you get a ticket. None of these are crimes, even though punishment in the form of a fine can be given. As a security officer, there are two types of crimes that you need to be concerned with. These are felonies and misdemeanors. There are other types of crimes such as statutory misdemeanors, common law crimes, and various degrees of felonies, and so forth. These crimes are more involved and very perplexing even to attorneys. So we're just going to stick to the basics and discuss felonies and misdemeanors. Felony. In most states, the definition of a felony is a crime where the punishment for that crime is more than a year in jail. Misdemeanor. In most states, the definition of a misdemeanor is a crime where the punishment is 1 year or less in jail. Don't confuse a felony crime with the sentence that a judge may impose. For example, if a criminal was convicted of robbery, which is a felony and carries a penalty of several years, and the judge decides to sentence the criminal to 6 months in jail, the crime did not change to a misdemeanor. It's still a felony. The judge just reduced the sentence. Just so you know, police officers may arrest someone who commits a misdemeanor in their presence, and they must arrest someone who is committing a felony in their presence. For security officers, unless your state laws state otherwise, if someone commits a misdemeanor in your presence, you may not make an arrest. The question I'm sure you're thinking is, how would I know what the punishment for all the different crimes are? Trust me, there are some law enforcement officers and even some lawyers who have trouble figuring that out as well. How do you know the difference? Here's an easy clarification rule you might want to use because you don't want to arrest someone thinking that they committed a felony when they actually committed a misdemeanor. When you observe someone committing a crime, ask yourself, is this a crime that I'm witnessing? If the answer is yes, then ask yourself, if I were to arrest that person, could they go to jail for more than a year? If the answer is clear in your mind, yes, consider that a felony. If the answer is clearly a no, then that's a misdemeanor. But suppose the answer is, I have no idea, then make it a misdemeanor. Why would you do that? Because you should always make your judgments regarding making an arrest on the side of caution. By making it a misdemeanor, it would prohibit you from making an arrest and possibly violating the law. I would be remiss if I didn't advise you that the Constitution says that a U.S. citizen may arrest anyone committing a felony in their presence. Most states have passed laws that back up this section of the Constitution, allowing citizens to make an arrest for felonies committed in their presence. This is the arrest authority for security officers working in those states. What about states that don't have this backup law? In that case, I would advise you to ask your instructor or supervisor regarding any felony arrests. You may have the authority to arrest someone who commits a felony in your presence. I emphasize may. Because remember, you don't have to make this arrest. Only police officers must make arrests for felonies. However, that does not relieve you of the responsibility of reporting it. If you don't arrest someone who committed a felony in your presence, you still have a duty to report it, putting as much information into it as possible. Here are some steps that you should take when you don't make an arrest. First and most important, call for assistance. Call the police. Call your supervisor. Memorize the suspect's description. Get the names, addresses, and telephone numbers of the victim, if there is one. Get the names, address, and telephone numbers of all witnesses. If there's a weapon involved, describe it in your report. If there's a vehicle involved, get the tag number. If the suspect is not fleeing and you feel that your safety is not in jeopardy, politely request the person to identify themselves. Then advise them that you need to call the police to sort things out and request them to remain until the police arrive. Just because the suspect is committing or committed a misdemeanor does not mean you just forget the whole thing and walk away. You're still obligated as a security officer to perform your responsibilities. Again, nothing says that you're not allowed to talk to that person. Let me give you an example. Suppose you're working in an auto supply store and you see a man put a box of spark plugs in his pocket. You can ask them about the crime they just committed, but remember to do it. You might say something like, "Excuse me, sir, may I talk to you about that box of spark plugs that you just put in your pocket?" In this situation, you should wait until they pass the cash register and are about to exit the premises, and then call the manager. But before you even approach someone suspected of a misdemeanor or a felony for that matter, be absolutely sure that you have sufficient probable cause. What is probable cause? The definition of probable cause is a set of facts or circumstances that a reasonable person believes happened or is happening. For example, did that man just put a box of spark plugs in his pocket and is he walking out the door without paying? Is that person breaking into that building? Is that man robbing that lady? Are they setting that building on fire? Is that a gun in that man's waistband? All of those are crimes that if a reasonable person sees it, they will come to the same conclusion as you. In other words, these were crimes in progress. I can't say this enough. Always be sure that you have probable cause before you take any action or make an arrest. When stopping someone or arresting someone without probable cause, you're opening yourself, your company, and your company's clients up to lawsuits. Suppose you have probable cause to arrest someone for a felony. You arrest them, and it's later determined that they did not commit the crime, or they were found not guilty in court. Were you wrong? Not if you had sufficient probable cause before you made the stop or the arrest. Here's an example. You hear an explosion and see a building on fire. At the same time, you see a man running away from the building. You believe he's responsible, as would any reasonable person. You yell for him to stop, identifying yourself as a security officer. He turns, stops, looks at you, and then starts running again. You chase and capture him. Later, it's determined that he didn't start the fire, but just panicked and ran away. Were you wrong? No. You had probable cause. When is a person considered under arrest? Many people do not understand when an arrest actually takes place. Is it when the person is officially booked? No. Is it when they're running away? No. Is it when you tell the person that they're under arrest? Not necessarily. You could tell someone that they're under arrest, but until you take physical control of them, the arrest is sketchy at best. Then exactly when does an arrest take place? For the answer to that question, you need to know what the legal definition of an arrest is. Here again, every state has their own definitions, but they're basically this. An arrest is the taking of a person into custody or depriving that person of their freedom with the intention of bringing that person to a court of law. The problem is that there's such a thin line between an arrest and no arrest. Even some police officers sometimes have a problem understanding exactly when the arrest took place. So let's break it down. Taking a person into custody is usually very clear. For example, while on duty, you grab a hold of someone by the arm, force them to come with you, or physically restrain them. You have just made an arrest. Also, you don't even have to tell them that they're under arrest. The fact that you placed your hands on them and are forcing them or attempting to force them to submit to your demands constitutes an arrest. This is still true even if you change your mind later and let the person go. Letting them go did not erase the arrest, it still took place. Remember that when you let someone go after you arrested them, you're creating an opportunity for a lawsuit. So I suggest once you make the arrest, always turn them over to the police or in some cases, the client's security personnel. For example, you're working in a jewelry store and a man comes in and you observe him grab several $1,000s of jewelry from the showcase. Clearly a felony. He walks past the cash register and is almost out the door when you arrest him. Later, the store manager or the police decide to release him. When they release him, it becomes the police or the store management's problem, not yours. You did your job, and for whatever reason, the police or the store manager let him go, not you. Always remember CYA, cover your actions. Whenever you deprive a person of their freedom, it's considered an arrest. Sometimes you don't even have to place your hands on them. One example is that if you didn't allow a person to leave a room or a building, you're depriving them of their freedom, which constitutes an arrest. On the other hand, if you're assigned to a security gate and do not let an unauthorized person into the property, that's not an arrest. You're preventing an unauthorized person from entering the client's property. You can also deprive a person of their freedom verbally. This example would be, you see someone you suspect that might have committed a crime, but you didn't actually see the crime. Therefore, you do not have probable cause. You call out to that person in an authoritative voice.
Come over here, I want to talk to you.
If that person obeys your command and walks over to you, it could later be argued in court that you did make an arrest. You deprived that person of their freedom. You also intimidated them into submitting to your demand and they gave up their freedom. In situations like that, use a different approach. Excuse me, miss, do you have a minute to talk to me? There's something I'd like to clear up. If she walks over, it's of her own free will. You can then ask her questions, but remember, she doesn't have to answer them or produce identification. In fact, she can walk away at any time. You need to be 100% sure. Unless you're 100% sure that you saw the crime, never be accusatory when you ask questions. In other words, don't ask questions that directly accuse a person of a crime. Don't say things like, "You stole that cell phone, didn't you?" Or, "Why did you steal that cell phone?" It's better to say something like, "Do you know anything about a cell phone that's missing?" If that fails and you still don't have probable cause, you have to let her go. What you do have is a good description of her, so when you make your report, you can list her as an unidentified person of interest and then report the circumstances. Just say to yourself, 365. There are 365 days in a year. Sooner or later, your day will come. When you make a legal arrest, you have a right to maintain that arrest for your safety and the safety of others. How much force can you use to maintain an arrest? You can only use enough force to maintain the arrest. Once you have restrained the person, you're not allowed to go beyond the restraint. Remember what I said in the beginning of the training session? You don't have to make an arrest. If you don't think that you'll be able to control someone, call for assistance before you try to make the arrest. In fact, make it a habit to always call for assistance if you intend to make an arrest. Remember that 365 I just told you about. Let's say you arrest a man for robbery, which is a felony. You're about to search him, and he suddenly turns around and punches you in the face and runs away. You chase and capture him again. You cannot beat on him just to get even. If you do, you could be charged with an assault. Just keep him restrained until the police arrive. If you have handcuffs, this is the time to use them. Remember, you're a professional security officer, and you need to act professionally. The law states that an arrested person may be searched incidental to the arrest for weapons, fruits of the crime, and contraband. When you make a legal arrest, you have the right to protect yourself and others from bodily harm. Therefore, you definitely want to be sure that the arrested person does not have a weapon on them that could harm you. A weapon is anything that could be used to harm you or someone else. In an arrest situation, even a ballpoint pen could be considered a weapon. Anything that a person has on them at the time of their arrest that could be used to injure you is considered a weapon. Nail files, keys, tools, cell phones, etc. The fruits of the crime are the items that they took from the crime during the criminal act. This could be money from a robbery, the laptop from a burglary, the jewelry from a store, etc. Contraband is anything that is illegal to even possess. Some examples are illegal drugs, a switchblade knife, a gun without a permit, and so on. Sometimes the items seized can be all three: a weapon, fruits of the crime, and contraband. One example is a stolen gun. It's obviously a weapon. It's fruits of the crime because it's the object which was stolen, and then it's contraband because it's illegal to possess. When you search someone incidental to arrest, as I just said, you're allowed to search them for weapons, fruits of the crime, and contraband if it applies. But it has to be incidental to the arrest. Suppose you're patting down a person and you feel a hard metal object. Your senses are telling you that there may be a weapon or something that can be used to harm you. You can seize that item for your personal safety. If you're a male security officer and have a female prisoner, it's not recommended that you search that woman in the same manner that you would search a man, for obvious reasons. That does not mean that a woman gets a free ride, so if possible, have a female security officer do the searching. If that's not possible, take their purse, if they have one, and check any outside garments, such as a coat or a jacket. Pull the jacket away from their body and squeeze the pockets, searching for weapons. Do not make contact with any part of their body with your hands unless they become violent. Remember, you always have the right to protect yourself from bodily harm. When searching someone's pockets, always pat the outside of the pocket first before you reach inside, because you never know if there are dirty needles inside that can infect you if you get stuck. Not all security officers carry handcuffs and usually patrol alone. They have to be constantly prepared for the unexpected. The moment after putting a suspect under arrest is when you start putting them under control. You never know how a person will react. Telling someone that they're under arrest and at the same time taking control of them is the procedure most police officers practice. That should be your procedure as well. Until the person is correctly handcuffed and is in custody of the police, you need to stay alert and in control of the situation. There are many ways to initially control a prisoner, as there are ways for a prisoner to try and escape custody. In this training video, we will only cover some basics but reliable procedures. Depending on the circumstances, the temperament of the perpetrator, and your personal safety, the initial apprehension should all determine what amount of force that you may use. Remember what I said, you may only use enough force to maintain the arrest. Using excessive force could subject you to criminal charges of assault. Your main objective when initiating the arrest is to put the prisoner at a disadvantage. The most effective position for you to be in is behind or to the side of him. If there's a wall handy, have the prisoner face the wall and stand about 3 feet from it. Have him spread his legs wide. Once he's in the position, tell him to unlock his fingers and place his palms against the wall. Then have him spread his arms out. Instruct him to keep his palms flat and fingers spread. The perpetrator should be at 3 different 45-degree angles. His body from his hands to his feet should be at 45 degrees or more. His legs should be spread no less than 45 degrees, and his arms should be at least 45 degrees apart, if not more. If he's not, instruct him how to adjust. Once the prisoner is in the correct spread eagle position, place the flat of your hand against the center of his back and apply enough pressure so that he cannot push away from the wall. Applying too much pressure could cause him to fall into the wall and creating perhaps greater problem. When you search him, you should search half the body at a time. Using the prisoner's spine as a center point, you search him in the following manner. Search one side at a time. Stand on his right side, take your foot, place it about 8 to 10 inches in front of his right foot. If he tries to get away, sweep his ankle away from the wall and he will fall face down, making it a lot safer to get him back under control. Start at the top of his body. If he has a hat, take it off and look inside. If he's wearing a long sleeve shirt, start at the wrist by taking both hands and circle loosely but still touching the wrist. Work your way down the arm to the shoulder. At the shoulders, have one of your hands behind him and the other in front of his chest. Slide your hands around in a circular pattern, patting and crushing his clothes. Work your way down to the waist. While at his waist, run your fingers inside the trouser belt line, looking for hidden weapons. Be sure to crush jackets or loose clothing and go into the pockets after you pat the outside of them. You don't want to just stick your fingers inside his belt line or put your hands in his pockets for the reason that I mentioned before, hypodermic needles. If you discover a weapon, remove it and place it out of reach of the prisoner. Put it behind your belt and trousers or in your pocket. Remember, you still need both hands to continue searching. Just because you find one weapon doesn't mean that there couldn't be more. Continue searching down the legs and around the ankles. Repeat this process on the left side. Once you're satisfied that there are no more weapons, place your hand against his back while you move behind him. If you have handcuffs, now's the time to use them. If not, then take your one hand and put your fingers inside his trousers at the belt line at his spine. Grab firmly and pull him off the wall and upwards so that he's on his toes and off balance, but not so high that he can't maintain some balance. If the prisoner tries to twist to the left, pull your elbow up and pull him by the belt, preventing him from turning. If he tries to turn to the right, pull him up and push him against his right arm with your right hand. As I stated at the beginning of this training session, this is just an overview of the law of arrest and does not cover every situation. If you're in a state where the authority for a security officer is much broader, your supervisor or manager can expand the laws of arrest. No other phase of your duties has the potential to cause legal problems for you and your company than making a false arrest. Know and understand the laws of arrest in your state, which will reduce your chances of becoming involved in an unwanted litigation and at the same time become a more professional security officer. This concludes this training session.